Historical overview of Restoration Age. The period from 1660 to 1700 is known as the Restoration period or the Age of Dryden. Dryden was the representative writer of this period. The restoration of King Charles II in 1660 marks the beginning of a new era both in the life and the literature of England. The king was received with wild joy on his return from exile. The change of government from Commonwealth to kingship uh, corresponded to a change in the mood of the nation. In this period, the Renaissance delight in this world and the ultimate possibilities of the exploration of the world, and the moral zeal and the earnest earnestness of the Puritan period could no more fascinate the people of England. Moody and loved remark. But in the greater part of the Restoration period, there was awareness of the limitation of human experience. Without faith in the extension of the resource, there was the disposition to accept such limitations to exploit the potentialities of the strictly human world. The historical events like the restoration of Charles II in 1660, the religious controversy and the revolution of 1688 deeply influenced the social life and the literary movements of the age. Now talk about the Restoration Age. The Restoration of Charles II brought about a revolutionary change in life and literature. During this period, gravity, moral earnestness, and decorum in all things, which distinguished the Puritan period, were thrown to the winds. The natural instincts which were suppressed during the previous era came to violent excess. The king had a number of mistresses and numerous children. He was surrounded by corrupt and degenerate ministers. Profligacy was glorified in the royal court. Corruption was rampant in all walks of life. The Great Fire of 1665 and the plague that followed it were regarded as suitable punishments for the sins of the profligate and selfish king. While London was burning and the people were suffering, the king and his nobles kept up their revels. The beginning of the Restoration begins the process of social transformation. The atmosphere of gaiety and cheerfulness, of licentiousness and moral laxity was restored. The theatres were reopened. There was a stern reaction against the morality of the Puritans. Morality was on the one. There was a luxury everywhere in life. All these tendencies of the age are clearly reflected in the literature of the period. During the Restoration period, there was a rapid development of science. The establishment of the Royal Society was a landmark in history of England. The interest in science began to grow. The growing interest in science resulted in the beginning of rational inquiry and scientific and objective outlook. Objectivity, rationality, and the intellectual equality also enlivened the literature of this period. The French influence was predominant. during this period because the king had spent the period of his exile in France. The French manners and fashion spread from the court to the aristocracy. It also influenced contemporary literature. Now we come to the religious and political conflict in this age. So, in this era, also witnessed the rise of two political parties, the Whigs and the Tories. These parties were to play a significant role in English politics. The Whigs sought to limit the powers in the interest of the people and the parliament. The Tories supported the divine right theory of the king and strove to restrain the powers of the people in the interest of the uh, hereditary rulers. The rise of these political parties gave a fresh importance to men of literary ability. Almost all the writers of this period had political affiliations. Dryden was a Troy. The religious controversies were even more bitter. The supporters of the Puritan regime were fanatically persecuted. The nation was predominantly Protestant, and the Catholics were unduly harassed. The religion of the king himself was suspect. His brother James was a Papist, which is the Roman Catholic. Charles II had no legitimate heir. It was certain that after him, his brother James, a Catholic, would succeed to the throne. Efforts were made to exclude James from the throne. The king sided with his brother and he removed all obstacles from the accession of James. Dryden's famous poem Absalom and Achitophel reflect these religious and political conflicts of the day. Now we come to the revolution. So the revolution, James the Second ascended the throne in 1685. He soon revealed his Roman Catholic prejudice, and he secretly tried to establish Catholicism in the country. He became unpopular within 3 years, and the whole nation rose against him. The bloodless revolution of 1688 called the Protestant William and Mary of Orange up to the throne. The country was once again restored to health and sanity. And these deep and vigorous movements brought about certain changes in the inner social life. With the revival of fashions and parties and the excitement caused by the Poppy's plot, equality of force and ardor revived in civic feelings, so that the tone of literature and of social life is somewhere modified. With the political and moral transformation which began in 1688, the very key note of English literature as of English life was greatly changed. It can be said that the last year of the 17th century from a distinct period, it is a brief but well marked transition separating the restoration from the age of classicism. Now we come to the point literary characteristics of Restoration age. So the literature of the Restoration period marked the complete breaking of ties with the Restoration with the Renaissance literature. It reflects the spirit of the age, the spirit of corruption and moral laxity, which were predominant in the social life of the Restoration, are reflected in literature. The following are the chief features of the period. So the features are the rise of neoclassicism. So in the Restoration marks a complete break with the past. The people believe in the present, the real and the material. Moody and Lovety remark In all directions, it appeared as a disposition towards conservation and moderation. Men had learned to fear individual enthusiasm, and therefore they tried to discourage it by setting up ideals of conduct in accordance with reason and common sense, to which all men should adapt themselves. Rules of etiquette and social conventions were established, and the problem of life became that of self expression within the narrow bounds which were thus prescribed. All these tendencies were reflected in the literature of this period. The writers, both in prose and poetry, tact, tas- taci- tacitly, sorry, tacitly agreed upon the rules and principles in accordance with which they should write. So, this is the important impact of the literature. Rules and literary conventions become more important than the depth and seriousness of the subject matter to the writers of this period. They express superficial manners and customs of the aristocratic and urban society, and did not pry into the mysteries of human mind and heart. And the another features is imitation of the ancient masters. The authors of the period were not imitation of the ancient masters. The authors of the period were not endowed with exceptional literary talents, so they turned to the ancient writers, in particular to the Latin writers, for guidance and inspiration. It was generally believed that the ancient had reached the acme of excellence, and the modern poets could do no better than model their writings on the classics. Thus grew the new classical school of poetry. The neoclassicists or pseudo-classicists could not soar to great imaginative heights, or could not penetrate deeply into human emotions. They directed their attention to the selfish imitation of rules, and ignored the importance of the subject matter. This habit was noticeable in the age of Dryden. In it strengthened in the succeeding age of Pope. So in this age, the writers are imitating from the ancients, and the another features is imitation of the French master. So King Charles II and his companions had spent the period of exile in France. So they demand that poetry and drama should follow the style to which they had become ac- accustomed in France. Shakespeare and his contemporaries could not satisfy the popular literary taste. Pepys wrote in his diary that he was bored to see Shakespeare Midsummer Night's Dream. The Italian influence had been dominant in Elizabethan period. Now began the period of French influence, which showed itself in English literature for the next century. Commenting on the French influence on the literature of this period, W. H. Hodgson writes, now the contemporary literature of France was characterized particularly by ludicity, vivacity, and by reason of the close attention given to form, correctness, elegance, and finish. It was essentially a literature of polite society, and had all the merits of all the limitation of such a literature. It was moreover a literature in which intellect was in the ascendant, and the critical faculty always in control. It was to this congenial literature that English writers now learn to look for guidance, and thus a great impulse was given to the development alike in our prose and in our verse of the principle of regularity and order and the spirit of good sense. As in verse preeminently, these were now cultivated at the expense of feeling and spontaneity. The growth of the artificial type of poetry was the inevitable result. The famous French writers like Corneille, uh, Racine, Molière, and Boileau were imitated. Boileau's good sense ideal became very popular. English writers imitated the French blindly, rather they copied the words vice of the French instead of their wit, delicacy, and refinement. The writer are they start to copy the or no copy not copy there is a imitates the French literature. The French influence is seen in the coarseness and intensity of the Restoration comedy of manners. The combined influence of French and classical models of tragedy is seen in the heroic tragedy. The French influence is responsible for the growth and popularity of opera. So, in the next features is the correctness and appropriateness. The work of the authors of the Restoration period was imitative and of limited quality, since they lacked creativity and flight of imagination. They abandoned freedom altogether and selfishly followed the rules. Edward Albert writes, thus they evolved a number of rules which can usually be summarized in the injunction be correct. Correctness means avoidance of enthusiasm, moderate opinions, moderately expressed, strict care and accuracy in poetic technique, and human and humble imitation of the style of Latin classic. The new tendency, which reached its climax in the age of Pope, is very clearly marked in the literature of the Restoration period. The Dryden Dr. Johnson employed the term Augustan, saying that Dryden did to English literature what Augustus did to which he found of brick and left of marble. Dryden was the first representative of the new ideas that were to dominate English literature till the end of the 18th century. Now we come to the realism and formalism. Restoration literature is realistic. It was very much concerned with life in London and with the details of dress, fashions, and manners. The early Restoration writers observed W.J. Long sought to paint realistic picture of corrupt court and society, and emphasized vice rather than virtues, and gave us course low plays without interest or moral significance. Like hobbies, they saw only the external of man, his body and aptitudes, mm, not his soul and his ideas. Later, however, this tendency to realism became more wholesome, while it neglected romantic poetry, in which youth is eternally interested. It led to a near study of the particular practical motives which govern human action. The Restoration writers mm, eschewed all extravagancies of thought, thought and language, and aimed to achieving directness and simplicity of the expression. Dryden accepted the excellent rule for his prose and adopted the heroic couplet and the next best thing of the greater part of this poetry. It is largely due to Dryden that writers developed formalism of style that praise almost mathematical elegance, miscalled classicism, which ruled the English